My name is Leigh, and I'm speaking for the Better City Deal campaign group. We noted with approval the Joint Assembly's recommendation to the Executive Board that it should publicly examine the various ideas proposed for tackling congestion in the city. However, you are no doubt conscious of the inconsistency of conducting such a consultation in parallel with consultations on specific schemes that are based on a belief, possibly false, that bus lanes are the best and most cost-effective way to get people out of cars. The Executive Board clearly feels under pressure to shore up the South Cambridgeshire draft local plan and to start delivering transport infrastructure as soon as possible to demonstrate to central government and the general public that it is promoting growth in the regional economy as the City Deal requires. But transportation is a connected system, and changes require a coherent and comprehensive plan, which we don't yet have. Council officers and external consultants are churning out detailed assessment reports and proposals for public consultation, most of which are interdependent. In particular, what measures are most appropriate to get more people onto buses, trains and bicycles will depend crucially on what measures are adopted to mitigate congestion in the city. It will be a huge mistake to rush into building expensive infrastructure that has an expected working life of at least 50 years and which will change the landscape and city environment irreversibly. I suggest to you that to avoid what is beginning to look like a slow-motion train crash, the Executive Board must acknowledge that the City Deal timetable is unrealistic for the transportation workstream and that it should ask central government for a pause of 12 to 24 months with the explicit aim of using that time and part of the first £20 million instalment to conduct a series of sessions around the region to explain the City Deal and invite the public to contribute constructive ideas. The City Deal is the biggest show in town, yet hardly anyone knows about it, yet alone understands it. Conclude consultations on congestion and traffic generators in the city, create the necessary joint authority government structures and staff up sufficiently to deliver the City Deal effectively and efficiently, draw up and put out for consultation a coherent outline 15-year transport strategy for the region and a comprehensive 5-year transport plan for the City Deal programme. Put in place the smart cities infrastructure needed to gather and analyse traffic and journey data and to improve the quality and timeliness of information available to travellers, conduct research, studies and trials of traffic management, access controls and bus routing. Will you make this recommendation to the Executive Board? Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Leigh. Graham, would you like to start us off with this?
Thank you, Chairman. Right, it's quite a number of points in there, but I'll try and cover them in general terms. I mean, it kind of feels like the essence is, I suppose you're saying a joined-up agenda, but you're saying that we need to hold off on what's happening right now because there may be something else that needs to come into play. And I think the simple answer to that is that evidence from around the world is very clear that you need, whatever terminology you want to use, you need carrots and sticks to make real change in the urban environment. So if we simply focus on for example, measures to try and change behaviour or even to restrict traffic movements, that in itself will not work if there are not adequate alternatives and really attractive alternatives in place, and vice versa. So if you only do the alternatives, i.e. better buses through bus lanes and so on, you won't necessarily get the change if you don't do some of those other aspects. So I think it's very clear in the City Deal programme. There may be in some people's eyes a sort of slight synchronisation issue, but I don't think that is the case. But it's very clear that we're saying both of those things are being addressed. So, for example, what the Assembly is considering today and the Board subsequently will consider is two particular radial routes, Milton Road and Histon Road. The Board has already, and the Assembly has already looked at the A428 corridor and the Western Orbital and the 1307, as we discussed, are coming up. So they're the key routes, and those elements of work are focused very, very much on providing the alternative better accommodation for non-car traffic, so essentially bus lanes, cycles and so on. But as the Chairman said in introduction, there's a very, very clear plan now for, you talked about a discussion or a conversation with the public and other stakeholders. So there's a very, very clear plan which, as the Chairman said, should be completed in its first phase by the end of this calendar year, to have that conversation through a call for evidence, so basically to go out to interested groups. And what the Board has committed to is, when that's reported into the Board process, then to moving on to a public consultation to look at those broader issues. We've got the work around the Cambridge Access Study, which is, again, focused very, very much on, if you like, managing the traffic movements, whereas the individual papers that are coming forward at the moment are, on the physical schemes. So it is all very, very much joined up. I mean, whether we like it or not, it is a reality that the money from the government is coming in a particular profile, and so we have to manage within the amount of money we've got. It is also a matter that even if we had a completely comprehensive plan in a city like Cambridge, which, as you rightly say, is a connected network, we couldn't do everything all at once anyway. So we have to do things in a staged manner. But I would emphasise, just without repeating myself too much, that we do need both elements, and as officers we've been very clear on that point to the Assembly and the Board. And we do have a plan for how those things come forward, and they're both running and will, if you like, come together. I think, particularly through the next calendar year, as some of these physical schemes, if you like, come closer to fruition, but actually we then really get into the consultation and the discussion about the complementary measures as well. So, I understand what you're saying, but I think we have that very much in hand.
Could I just follow up an aspect of the question then? So are we, or should we be sufficiently worried about delivering what we have said we're going to deliver over the period we've got? Because that's an element, I think, of the question.
Chairman, I don't think we should be worried about what we've got to deliver. What the board did do was allocate £180 million worth of schemes for what initially is £100 million worth of government money. The balance between those two will partly come from external funding, so it could be Section 106 or SIL or other sources. But when we made that recommendation, we also made a point about there being some over-profiling deliberately, because as we will find out when we get onto the later papers on this agenda, there are some really complex schemes. Most of those schemes are likely to be coming forward towards the back end of the programme, so there may be a bit of slippage in terms of delivery. So I wouldn't say we should be worried about the ability to deliver. What we need to do is to deliver £100 million worth of schemes, 100 million plus of the key schemes within the first 5 years of the City deal. That's the commitment we've made to government. I feel confident that we are on course to do that, and in parallel with all of that delivery, we will be seeking to agree through the board, ultimately, on the complementary measures that will go alongside that to get the maximum amount of benefit. And again, just as a final point, we've been clear that to radically change the way that transport operates in Cambridge City, you need about 15 to 20% reduction in traffic, which means that 80% of the traffic that's currently there could still be there. But I think we've also been clear, as picking up the questioner's points, that does need to be from a combination of things, and that's what we're working towards.
Thank you. I must admit it was my understanding that we were always being advised that we were going to need to improve the radial access to the city, as well as make an intervention in the congestion traffic management regime inside the city. Obviously, it's still very much an open question what form of radial improvements we make. That's all being consulted on, and it's also going to be very much up for the public debate about the type of intervention we make so far as congestion and traffic management in the city is concerned. But I had never understood that it was the advice from officers that it was a question of you do one or the other. Obviously the mix between them is going to be determined, but also needs to be fitted correctly together. But the sense in which that if you're doing the one, you don't need to do the other, well, that may be a decision that the board makes in the course of time, but I don't think that's the sort of the prime approach that we have in front of us. But that's my understanding. Francis, you wanted to say something?
Chairman, thank you. I think the question is, would we make a recommendation to the Executive Board that we sort of ask central government for a pause of 12 to 24 months? And I, for one, would absolutely not make that recommendation to the Executive Board in any way. I support and endorse everything that Mr. Hughes has said. I think most of the 6 things on this list we're doing already. We're doing a wonderful and enormous amount of research, of employment of consultants, of thinking about the problem, of consulting with residents, of doing an analysis. it's really beginning to get ahead of steam. You just have to look at our forward plan of what's going to go on in the next 1 to 2 years, and I begin to get very proud of it. I think if we went to ask central government for a pause of 12 to 24 months, we would be made the absolute laughing stock of East Anglia and the country, and it would not be a better city deal, it would be a far, far worse one.
Thank you. Most sensible that I just ask, is there a contrary view to that anyone wants to express? Okay, well then, rather than just carry on agreeing with ourselves, I think we will leave it as noting your point of view, Mr. Leigh, and particularly welcoming your support for the upcoming public debate we're going to organise with the board on the congestion measures. But thank you very much indeed.